All right, so in this video, we're going to take a moment and talk about the Beatles tune "She Loves You," and we're going to talk about where there was a question about how I would approach doing this with a student if they wanted to play the chords in the right hand to accompany a singer, and so taking a look at kind of each section of the song. If we start with the intro is going to start again. We're in the key of G here, so here's where we are. The song's going to start on a 6 chord. It starts on an E minor. And then it goes to a 2 chord. However, it's not going to be an A minor because it's the Beatles, and they're going to change it up. So we're going to get rid of that minor. They're actually going to play a 2/7 chord there. So a dominant 7, and then from there they're going to go to a 4 chord, and that'll be here, the C chord, and then they're going to go to a 1 chord. So if we take a listen to the melody, she loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's going over the E. She loves you. So they got that melody kind of just consistently, at the top there over each of those chords. So one of the things that I might do, if we'll take a minute, I'll grab a sheet of paper here. Let's see, we'll go to some blank paper here. So if we look at the chords, let's say we got an E minor chord, and then we're going to an A7 chord, and then we're going to a C chord, and then we're going to a G chord. So if we just kind of like write out the notes that are in those, so we got E, G, and B. Here we're going to have A, C sharp, E, and G. Then we have C, E, and G, and then we go to G, B, and D. And right away we can see that we have, here's a G, here's a G, here's a G, and here's a G. So that's kind of consistent. That's this is a good spot to see, like, okay, we have this kind of one common tone that's gonna stick with us. Now we have 4 notes here on the A7 chord, so we can kind of chop off the root and make sure we play that in the bass. And so right from there, if we look at this, and again we have that melody. So if we wanted to voice that at the top, now one of the first things I teach students with the minor chords is we can always stack a primary over a diatonic minor chord. So since this is the 6 chord, we can stack a 1 chord on top of it. So the G chord, you could turn this into an E minor 7 here and basically have this D on the top. So that gives you this G major chord over the E in the bass. Now you could just play it as a stock E minor triad, but when we have that, even the first melody note is the D. That is the minor 7. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's kind of part of the melody that's being sung. So the first thing that I would probably do is I would have a student take that first chord and maybe play it like this. So say we're not going to play the melody. Now, what we want to do is what I call ground zero, which is don't worry about any rhythm. When they're just starting to work, trying to figure out these inversions, just playing the chords. Don't even necessarily have to be in time right now, just playing one chord to the next. So she loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. So you got that G structure over the E. And then when we go to this A7, again, we're going to keep this G on top, and we're looking for a C sharp and an E. So wherever the common tone is, I like to have them try to keep it in place. So if the common tone's at the top, let's try to keep it on the top. So we could play it like that, C sharp and E. And then we have 2 notes that are going to be the same. When we go over to the C chord, we see this, we have another hold note here. And then this C sharp can drop. So she loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. All we got to do is drop the thumb. To you, yeah, 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 yeah. And then we're back to the G chord where we started. So without really having to move, you didn't move the pinky at all. The 5th fingers just stayed on G the whole time. And that's it. Now, there's nothing wrong with starting in root position. You're talking about how do we get them out of that, but sometimes it's a good place to start, to start so they can visualize all these chords before they try to rebuild them in a different shape or to look for those common tones. But this might be an example of something that I do right there. So they go. And that could be a simple rhythmic pattern, and if you wanted to, you could put in the melody. Something like that. So you can find a way to kind of work it in if you wanted to without really having to leave those shapes that you've kind of created. Okay, so now we can talk about the verse for a moment. So here I'm going to open up the primary chord scale chart, And once again, still in G, right? And the verse chords here, we're going to be starting with a G chord, going to an E minor 7, going to a B minor, going to a D. So once again, we'll kind of circle the chords that we're using for this section. They're going to be starting on the 1 chord, and then they're going to go to a 6 chord, the E minor 7, and then we have the B minor, which I have over here, stacked over here, B minor 7 as a 5/3, and then we go to the D chord, which is a 5. So when we make this move from the 1 to the 6 chord, if you have a student doing root position chords and they're going here and then they're coming all the way down to this E minor, again, it's a fine place to start so that they understand those basic triads. However, you can get them to see that, the melody here. When you hit that E minor, the melody note is a D, which creates the minor 7, which is probably why I'm assuming it's in your chart that way. But when you're playing it, you can just change your bass note. And then when we go to this B minor chord, you have the B minor here. And one of the things I teach my students, again, we're on a diatonic minor triad. It's the 3 minor, and so minor 7 is the most common minor variant. In almost every situation, it won't only work, but it'll actually enhance the sound. So you could just play a straight B minor chord, and then go to your D chord here. So. But you could also play it as a 5/3, and so our 5 chord is the D. So you could play both of these sections. You could play the G, and then the G over the E, and then you would go to D over B, and then to D. So once again, you're only really changing the chords in the right hand twice: G, G, D, D, just with different bass notes, and over the E, then D with B. That's a good way to get them to do some basic inversions right there. Now I chose this inversion just because that's where the melody is, but if you don't care about the melody because you got someone singing it, when you're going from a G to a D, that's a 1 chord to a 5 chord. And so I teach students that is what they're looking for there is a hold and drop. So if you're talking about just trying to keep common tones in place, so when you go from a 1 to a 5, you're going to have a common tone. And it's going to be that top note. It's actually the root of the chord that you're going to. So when you're here, when I want to go to the D, I hold the D and I drop the other 2 voices, and then we move it up, and then so that's a way to do it there. Now you can do the same thing. I might make this part of the lesson because again, it's not necessarily just about the song. We're trying to do the concepts too. So maybe I'll have them do it here. I'm still going to hold the D and drop the other 2. Right? And you can do the same thing in the other version. So that's a way that they could start in each position or inversion, however you decide to call them. I call them positions, position 1, 2, and 3. But it's if you kind of work through it that way, because again, there's not a whole lot that they have to learn there. It's 4 chords, but really in the right hand, we're stacking those primary chords over the secondary roots, meaning the 1 chord over the 6. The 1 is the primary over the 6, which is the secondary root. And then when we have our 5/3, that's our 3 minor 7. Minor 7s in disguise, kind of. You have your 5 chord over the 3 in the bass. And then from there, there's kind of a little tag at the end of the verse. She says she loves you. And then it goes to E minor. And then we go to a 4 chord, but it's with a minor adjustment. So it's, I call these flip tonalities. But instead of the C major, you go to the C minor. And then you can move everything up to D. Now, whenever you have 2 letter names kind of next to each other, you're not, if you're just talking basic triad shapes, a C to a D, everything's gonna move up 1, right? So you're not gonna have a common tone really moving there. So that's really what you're unless you're adding extensions and things. But so that's really how I would kind of start this with the student, looking for those, and then maybe from there you can talk about doing more bass motion or things like that, or more rhythmic complexity. But to start off, you can just start off in ground zero and just long tones, hold the chords, and get used to those movements. But a lot of it has to do with just coming down to one, understanding where the common tones are when you're moving between the chords, but also, understanding that with the minor chords, if you're doing minor sevens, which again, if it's a diatonic chord, like when you have that C minor, I wouldn't necessarily do a minor seven there, because adding a minor seven is going to add a B flat. So there's another note that's kind of outside the key. So when you're doing like the flip tonalities and things like that, you can try it, and if you like the sound, you can use it. But it's really more. I say that with the diatonic minors is you can pretty much just do it. The chord chart doesn't need to give you permission. You can just add a minor seven to any diatonic minor chord. And if there's a few occasions where like, geez, even that sounds too complicated for this song, it's a little more basic than that, then you can strip it back to the triad. That's fine. But those are some of the things that I might do to with a student on a song like this, if we're trying to look for finding some voicings that are outside of root position. But again, root position is not a bad place to start. It's important for them to understand how to build it kind of from the root up, and before you turn in, you start reshaping them or rebuilding them into other shapes. So if you have any other questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. All right, talk to you guys soon.